he moved from Bedfordshire to Dorset about 30 years ago as a locum dentist, and then had his own practice in Weymouth for many years. He now lives in Upwey, where he's retired, and he does a lot of research on house histories. He's also written a number of books. King Alfred, A Man on the Move, 3 Histories, A Brief History of Town House, which is the pink walled house which is being restored at the moment at Top of Town. And his hobbies are the piano, languages, and beer. So his subject tonight is house histories, so that it will give you some guidance if you want to research your house history, and you know that if you get stuck, well, you've got somebody to come and speak to. Thank you.
That introduction was fairly apt because, as was just said, I'm not from Dorset. I'm not from Dorchester. So many of you in this room will know an awful lot more about the town and some of the things I'm going to talk about than I do. But I'll probably still be able to bring some things to your attention that you don't know about. That's not because I've read more than you or anything else. It's purely because I've gone down particular rabbit holes and you find things. And why house histories? Why history at all? But in particular with house histories, you find connections. One of the things with connections, I mean, there's the famous saying that we are all 6 degrees of separation from anybody else in the world. In other words, you can shake somebody's hand, they shake somebody else's hand, a particular person, and so on, and you could be with somebody in sub-Saharan Africa, maybe, by doing that. Now, with history, historical facts, it's even better because it doesn't depend on how many people you know. Facts are just there and things connect very quickly. And what I'm trying to do is, for those who haven't done a house history, to do it, because you will be surprised, like your own genealogy, if you've done genealogy, you'll be surprised what comes out and what connects. And it's for everybody else as well to see those connections if you bring it to the public. So house histories, I think, are really important and a satisfying thing to do. So some basic questions that you might want to ask yourself. I apologize if that's a bit small for those at the back. Everybody can see that, yes? Obvious questions. When was my house built? What was there before? Maybe some more searching questions. Why was it built? Was it housing? Was it agricultural storage, trading, pubs, railways, religious institutions, fire stations, pubs? Who lived there? Who owned it? Because that's all very often not the same thing. Why did they live there? Why did they own it? Did they move for work? Did they inherit it? Did they get married and live there? Were they working for an owner? Railways, servants, all sorts of things. So these questions will get you going really quite deeply. Okay, so 2 parts. I assume I've got about an hour, roughly. Okay. Firstly, I'm going to have a look at some of the means and methods that you can use to research a house. It doesn't have to be your house if you can't find a house. And houses vary so much. Not everybody in this room will live in houses like these, or they may live in flats, but they are still a place with a history. And then I'm going to run through some examples. I'm going to take you to some places, including these ones, not very far from here. The green ones are a bad design, I think, because you can't read them very well, but I will read them out. So some sources that you can go to. Maps are great, and you can get all the Ordnance Survey maps online. The National Library of Scotland, if you haven't heard of that, supplies many, many Ordnance Survey maps at all sorts of different scales, down to town scale. I'll show you some in a minute. If you can get them, and I'll show you how in a minute, tithe maps are really, really important for the 1840s approximately, because they tell you who was on each plot, owner and occupier, and the names of fields even. It's really interesting. Genealogical records, a lot of you will be familiar with those. Censuses, death certificates, marriage certificates, and so on. Newspapers, books, old deeds are quite good. Dorset History Centre must not be underestimated. They have a huge amount of stuff. You just have to, and I don't know if it's ever possible to catalogue it better, but they've got a huge amount of stuff there. Dorset Online Parish Clerk's website is really good. If you haven't heard of that, not a lot of people have heard of that for some reason. There is an awful lot of material there to do with births, marriages, deaths, and a lot of other stuff as well. And you can search by the name of the building. Mail, old postcards, photos. I put finds there because I'm an occasional metal detectorist as well. And sometimes you find things in gardens that tell you something about the history of the house. Other records, diaries, etc. I haven't got all the maps to show you because some of them I haven't got copyright to, but the earliest ones, John Speed, that is on the Dorset OPC website that I just mentioned. There's also one of the earliest ones is a plan of the encampment near Dorchester in 1757, which was done during the 7 Years' War. It's absolutely great for West Fordington, which is where we are, historically speaking, all the way down to Martinstown. That's also on that website. This is a map I have, so I'm allowed to show it. It's from, this particular one is from Hutchins' History of Dorchester, 3rd edition. And it's the 1771 map done for the aldermen of the corporation. And you will find that it's very severe as regards what's in and out of Dorchester. It cuts off exactly where, almost exactly where Dorchester ends. So there's nothing outside of the walls. Where we are now, yes. Everybody's aware that we're, historically speaking, we're not in Dorchester, we're in part of Fordington, because Fordington came all the way around from the east to the south to the west, where we are now. And we are actually on a site where there was once a tin chapel. But that would be a digression. That's homing in on the 1771 map. And the reason why I'm homing on a particular area is that they relate to some of the houses I'm going to talk about later. Things have changed. G is the cupola, which is just there, which was taken down and which is where the water pump is now. And that was about the same time as the corn market was put in. Obviously many other changes on there, but I won't dwell on that because we'll never get there. Another map that I have, so I can put up, this is the 1868 boundary map of Dorchester. Now this is is a little bit more friendly towards people in Fordington, because you can see that there are buildings outside of Dorchester now. In fact, some of them at this stage will have been there quite a long time, but you can see one of the barracks. You can see the cavalry barracks, the Marabou barracks, north of Poundbury Road, next to Poundbury Camp, which is where it says Danebury Tunnel. Lawrence Barrow, which isn't there anymore because it's roughly where the Dorset History Centre is, more or less. But you can see various interesting things on maps there. So if you had a house in Dorchester or Fordington or around, maps like this are very useful. So let's just rattle through. These maps are freely available on the ones I'm putting up now on the National Library of Scotland. And anybody can go to these and look at them. And this one obviously is, well, it says 1888 at the top, so it's 1888. And you can see quite a lot of detail there as to what's going on then, but it gets even better. There's another one, that's 1903, I do believe. I've just cut it off at the top. We've now got the infantry barracks, you can see there. Were they on the previous one? Yes, the infantry barracks. So you've got the two barracks now. If everybody's not clear about the barracks, the original barracks was the one at the top where it says Royal Horse Artillery Barracks. That was built in the late 1700s. The infantry barracks was built in the 1800s and must have had a significant impact on the town, obviously. And right up to 1947. And these wonderful maps, which are town maps, and really zoom in. So we've got High West Street here, and we've got, on the far left, you have this building called Grove House, which is actually now top of Town House. This is 1888, that one. So you can see it's already got its two wings. In fact, the wing going down Bridport Road had been there for a very long time. The newer wing, which goes down Grove Road, down the Grove, is more recent. But you can also see some other houses that I'll be looking at along here on the north side of High West Street, and Shire Hall's in there as well, which was only built in its current form in 1797 by Thomas Hardwick, but there would have been some sort of previous building there because we have records of things going on there. And that's called Shire Hall Lane then, not Glide Path Road. It was called Shire Hall Lane for a while, but it was, historically speaking, going back to medieval times, a far more important road than it seems now, because it was the road leading to the North Gate. So we have North Street, is it North Street by the prison currently, but this, and the market at that time, but this was the main route out in medieval times. So these maps are very useful. I know it doesn't tell you what I've just told you, but you can see things. The main reason I put this one in is I've always been fascinated by the where the medieval or the 1600s town brewery and workhouse was. And it wasn't on Damers Road, that was a later one. It was where South Terrace is, which is in the middle here. This is for the Zoomers, sorry. So it's just before you get to, if you're going north, it's just before you get to where the horrible fire we had was. There's some buildings set back, and the buildings there are filling in the area where the old workhouse and the municipal brewery were once located. There were, yes, maybe just next to, yes. You'll find, if you look at it even now, the buildings are just set back a couple of feet. Okay, so that's, I put that up because that is something that I didn't see looking at the history of Dorchester for a very long time. And then one or two clues fell into place, and I realized that's where that was. But you've got obviously Ancestry, the genealogist, tithe maps, the important tithe maps I mentioned. I haven't put any up because I don't have copyright. The genealogist website has them all. But if you're on Ancestry, for some peculiar reason I don't really understand, you've got all the Dorset ones and none for anywhere else. For Dorchester, it's not Dorchester itself, it's not massively useful because only, get this right, St. Peter's was tithable. And because the other parishes, All Saints and Holy Trinity weren't tithable, there's no tithe map. So you can't find that out. I don't know why. The newspaper archives are really, really good, and you can get to those in two ways. There's the British Newspaper Archive, which is searchable, or you could, if you're in Find My Past, you get it for free, but in my opinion, not free, you get it included. The search engine for it isn't as good on Find My Past. So if you're asking me whether you go to British Newspaper Archive as a standalone, I would suggest yes. It does struggle with the blurry print on older newspapers, but you can type in names and of anybody you're researching, some addresses, and often something that you didn't expect will come up. They haven't got all issues, but they've got, as you can see there, they've got some fairly old newspapers. For some reason, they're not very good for World War I and World War II. They seem to stop around those periods. I don't know whether somebody else has bought the rights to them. I wouldn't be surprised. And no echoes. That doesn't mean sound. No Dorset echoes. Books. These are some of the books I'm fortunate to have. But you'd spend a long time trawling. It's not a way to find things specific quickly. Although British History Online, a website, has searchable books, including the A volume of the Victoria County History, and the Royal RCHM stands for the Royal Commission on Historic Monuments. I think that was done in the 1970s and goes through almost every historic building and other things in the county, in fact the whole country, because it covers each county. More for my scrappy library, and also a reminder that there's this thing called archive.org, which you can find things on, including the first edition of Hutchins, which is, for those not familiar, Hutchins is the first major historical work on the county of Dorset. First edition is 1774. So you can actually go to that. These are free, these websites, by the way. Dorset Yearbook's great as well, and you've got all sorts of things. Down here, I'm not really looking at the Burke's Peerage. I'm looking at this book here, which is really useful if people are seriously interested. It's Mayo's 1908 or something like that, records of the borough of Dorchester, and they are really interesting, especially if you like Latin. But they do. There's a lot, most of it isn't, all right. But that's really interesting, and that is available online as well. I can't remember which site. Deeds, absolutely fantastic if you've got access to them. They usually have maps. They have searches, planning permissions, previous owners, adjacent ownerships, which is really interesting sometimes, especially if you're trying to work out what was next door to something at a particular time. And sometimes being able to look at deeds for different things, for things that you're not interested in, will tell you what's next door. Another plug for the Dorset History Centre. It's a shame that there isn't more available online. You do need to go there physically. It's a lot of work to do, I know, to scan things in and all of that. And Dorset Online Parish Clerks. The catalogue is online, and also often, sometimes, very helpful, because the catalogue itself sometimes contains details from what is in the actual item you're looking for. photos, postcards, mail. Here's some. There's Borough Gardens, Dorchester. That's Abbotsbury at the bottom, and there's more Dorchester here. You know, there's loads of these. You can go on eBay and fill your boots. There's loads of these, and books as well of these. Other records, diaries. Oh, I thought I wrote something in there. It was going to be audio and video recordings. Top of Town House. Let's have a look at some houses now. Now, going back to the point about you never know where things are going to go. Before I start on Top of Town House, I was involved in two things. One was the Royal Standard pub in Upway. And I thought, well, here's a pub. And it turned out, I did have a clue, which is why I looked at it, that it was owned once by Thomas Hardy's paternal aunt with her husband. And nowhere, anywhere, I'd trawled through the Thomas Hardy books, was there anything about that side. So going into that, flushed all that out. That's in that now forms a chapter of one of my books on Upway, which is available on Amazon and the Wishing Well. And the Wishing Well, I did the Wishing Well as well in Upway, and that flushed out a load of stuff to do with Queen Charlotte, who was the wife of King George III, because I knew King George had been there, and by implication, Charlotte as well, his wife. But she kept going back. She went back multiple times. So all this stuff comes out. And they were quite pleased to have that more solid royal connection than they thought, because their previous royal connection was the 1923 visit of the future Edward VIII, who came also to Dorchester to visit Thomas Hardy and went to some fields in Fordington Fields, to some farms, and then went down to the Wishing Well to have a glass of water, and then went back to wherever he was going, Windsor, I think. So Top of Town House. I'll give you a link at the end about how to get these things. It really revolves around two families. One is the Henning family, and one is the Mansell family. So the dates here, a lot of them end in 1, because they're census dates. Some are not, because I got information from other places. But by 1918, it was the Ministry of National Service. The Mansells had moved out by then. I think the last Mansell had a son and he died. And they sold the house and it went to the Ministry of National Service. And it became the Dorset War Pensions Committee in World War I. It's a big house, so it probably wasn't just that. Maybe the rooms were empty, maybe other things were going on. And after World War I, it became customs and excise, inland revenue. And World War II, it became a place to inquire about, you wanted to go to fight, but you didn't know what service to join, whether you wanted to go Air Force, Navy, Army, something else. So that's where you would go to have that all sorted out. And later on, it became the Employment Exchange, and its most recent incarnation, when it was a state building, was the Learning and Development Centre for Dorchester. The name of the place gave me a real headache. First known as Grampound House, and then known as Grove House, and then known as we know it now as Top of Town House or Top of Town House. The Grampound House is tricky, but there is a baptism record which says born at Grampound House, otherwise known as Grove House. Now, if you're a historian, something like that is gold, because it nails it. So it was definitely Grampound House. But why was it Grampound House? Well, I mean, I don't know if any of you know, but Grampound is like a village in Cornwall. It's Cornwall. So why Grandpound? Now I came up with several theories, and I don't think I've nailed it, but I've had a go. Not everything is on this one. My first inclination was that the house was initially owned by Robert Williams. And the reason I thought that, this is Robert Williams of Bridehead, and he owned other things around and was involved with the Williams Bank. And he had been an MP for Grandpound. What a coincidence. That was in 1808, and then he later became an MP in Dorchester in those dates. So I thought, yes, it's got to be him. But somebody put a very old map, and I don't know who did it, onto a Facebook group. And it's a map I haven't seen, and I haven't seen since. And it was this part of Dorchester, and right at the bottom by Mohun Bridge, do you know what I mean? Down at the bottom of the Grove, there was a plot of land on the West Mills side, and it said on it in faint writing, Grandpound. Now, my current theory is this. So the land there was owned by the Hennings. Before that, there is good reason to believe that it was owned by Denzil Hollis, going back. That is because Denzil Hollis lived at Frome Whitfield, or the settlement next to it, where there's a church called immediately next to it, nothing much to see now, where there's the remains, or that's probably an exaggeration to call it that, of a St. Nicholas church. And so he lived there, and then the Hennings lived there. And if you look at the tithe, the tithe map, you will find that the Hennings owned, the family owned the fields all the way down from top of Town House to West Mills, so at the bottom of the hill. So it seems like the Hennings, who owned top of Town House, took over the land to do with Denzil Hollis. And they also lived, the Hennings also lived at Frome Whitfield. Now, what you might be asking yourself, is this got to do with Grandpound? Now, Denzil Hollis was one of the 5 men that Charles I went into Parliament to try and seize. But they weren't there because they'd heard of the approach of Charles I coming to get them. Now, so Denzil Hollis was one of them. There was another one called, and his name escapes me. I had it on the slide, but I think it's on the other file. But his friend, was also an MP for Grandpound. So what I think has happened, this friend, by the way, got killed in a battle in 1642, right at the beginning of the Civil War. So a friend of Denzil Hollis got killed in a battle in 1642. And this friend of Denzil Hollis, who got killed in this battle, had been an MP for Grandpound. So it is conjecture, but I think there may be something in it to say that that plot of land was called Grandpound in honour of his friend. Okay, so that's right at the bottom of the hill, and Grandpound House is at the top. But it was all owned by the same people. So I think that name was taken. Its meaning, whatever it was, whether I've been talking rubbish or whether there was another meaning, or whether there was actually a Grandpound that was completely unrelated to Grandpound in Cornwall, I don't know. But the meaning was lost, and it became Grove House, because that area became known as the Grove. So it became Grove House. And then it started to become known as Top of Town. And there's a period around the 1890s to about 1910 where it's interchangeable. It's Grove House and it's Top of Town House. It's, you know, depending, you know, what you're reading, but it's never called Grandpound House again. So how old is it? This is a real problem. The earliest I've got back is 1805. And the only reason, it's certainly there by 1810 because a building is shown there. The only reason I know it's 1805 is because of a fuzzy map by somebody called Charles Budgeon. It was some preparatory ordnance survey sketch. Buildings. Exactly where Top of Town House is. The cavalry barracks are in, because they were 1794. So they're only 11-year-olds, the cavalry barracks at that time. The new Shire Hall, new then, 1797, built by Thomas Hardwick, is there. So it is possible to speculate. I mean, there was a building boom. You know, quite obviously, the cavalry barracks, Shire Hall, the prison, which was built by then, late 1790s, I think. So there was a building boom, and it probably just got built at the same time. But I don't know by who, and I don't know precisely when. I'm not going to spend too much time on the families. How am I doing for time? What time am I finishing? About 8:30. Halfway through. Okay, let's not. So I'll just skip to the essentials. Some of the colour here isn't very friendly for the lightings. Yeah, so we're talking about connections earlier. So there's a strong connection between this house and Frome Whitfield. Now, if people don't know where that is, if you go out of Dorchester and you head north, and do you know where the Blue Bridge is? Go across the Blue Bridge and keep going, you eventually come to some tall hedges, and there's a house in there, and that's Frome Whitfield. Okay, so there's a strong connection between Top of Town House and that. So basically, the first family, the head of the family, was William Lewis Henning. His father, William Henning, was still living at Frome Whitfield. He died. So this family, William Lewis Henning family, moved to Frome Whitfield. And what happened next? William Lewis Henning's brother was living at 51 High West Street, and he now moves to Top of Town House. So I've put a little map up of Frome Whitfield there. It's right in the centre for the zoomers, and you can see the buildings here. So the Blue Bridge is coming up from approximately the middle of the slide going north, and this is where you walk up here and you go round it. There's still a house there, and there is evidence that there used to be another settlement here somewhere called Hollis Frome, named after Denzil Hollis, and that this church, St. Nicholas Church, site of it says, by the way, was to do with Hollis Frome. And that's the Sun Inn, by the way, if you want to orientate yourself. And Coker's Frome over there, famous for the Dorchester show. Sherlock Henning is worth a look. He was the son of the first head of the household. And he had an illustrious military career. It says Frome Whitfield with 2 O's. That's not a mistake. It's spelt variably. He was Order of the Bath, and importantly for the town, he was in charge of the new depot barracks in 1840. The barracks can be confusing. The depot barracks are where you see the Military Keep Museum, and behind there where the post office buildings are and the other buildings behind it. The cavalry barracks is on the other side of Poundbury Road, where you've got the territorials, I think, in there. So he was in charge of that. So he was a prominent person in the town. So as I said, as William Lewis Henning moved out, the other Henning family moved in. Then the family dies out and it goes to the Mansell, or that line of the family goes out. Or Mansells, again, variably spelt. So it's Arthur Mansell and his wife, Claire Henrietta Lascelles, Bornaz, surname Bornaz. Now, there's an interesting connection here because he was the son of John Mansell of Smedmore House. Now, you might know where Smedmore House is. It's on the coast. in the Purbecks near Kimmeridge. It wasn't John Mansell's house originally. He obtained Smedmore House because he married Louisa Pleydell, and it was the Pleydell family's house. Nonetheless, he had an illustrious career as well, military, moved around quite a lot, had 7 children, 7 servants, and a governess from Prussia. And then, as I said, by 1918, it's taken on by the Ministry of National Service. The Mansells, one of the things which comes out of all this are especially the newspaper articles, really strong on picking up on activities of people and what they did, and their garden parties and weddings they went to, and funerals, and what they wore and all that sort of business, which is, you know, can be quite informative. So the head of the family, Arthur Mansell, was secretary of the local RSPCA, and they were doing an awful lot of things to do with farming, actually, which Thomas Hardy would have been very appreciative of course. His wife was secretary of the Dorchester School of Art, which was down High West Street on the south side, and their president was Pitt Rivers, so there was quite a lot going on down there. And Claire was always in the paper pressing on about compulsory smallpox vaccination and vehemently criticizing so-called conscientious objectors. All of this, of course, has a modern ring to it with the recent pandemic. Arthur was a keen cricketer playing for Kingston Park. It took me a long time to work out where Kingston Park was, but I finally realized it must be at, somebody correct me if I'm wrong, Kingston Moorwood. And Arthur was living at top of Town House at the top of High West Street. He was tenaciously going on at the council and local newspapers about the congestion down High West Street. Because people, traders, just set up wherever they wanted and put their rubbish out and whatnot. And he was constantly going on about this, writing to the council of the time. And they eventually told him, well, you know, you're one of the more powerful people in this town, you know, one of the more influential people in this town. Why don't you do something about it? And he said, well, I can't do anything about it when the council, don't do anything about it. And this went backwards and forwards for ages, and nothing effectively got done. He had a son. There's a lot of military in here. I didn't really intend this to be just solely military, but it's just the way it falls out. The Tirah expedition was the Khyber Pass, the uprising in the Khyber Pass. Boer War, you've all heard of. Sadly, never married and moved to Canada and died there. But an important person militarily. Number 51, I'll have to start rattling through these now. So we've now moved down High West Street. We've skipped some houses. And you may recognize this house from its color scheme and that green door, which is quite green, quite noticeable. This one, I'll just go back to it because it used to be was owned for 18 years by Thomas Hardy. He never lived there, but he must have been in and out, especially as he had people he knew living there. As I said before, the second Henning family originally lived there, so they moved up to top of Town House. So the Hennings move out, and in 1851, or around that date, because that's a census date, a tea merchant moves in, and he's there for at least 10 years. He's quite a major tea merchant, because he goes on the steeplechases, and eventually he moves to London, the City of London, Mark Street, and he applies to be a free man of the City of London. So he's obviously doing all right for himself. Then it becomes a draper's for a while. Then it goes to 2 sisters, young sisters, who are hat makers, milliners. And at this stage, it is owned by Hardy, because he was owning it from 1892. We know all this because the deeds, coming back to the Dorset History Centre, they have all the transactions here, and you can actually look at them, and signed by Hardy on a particular date, you know, in and out, you know, when he acquired it and when he sold it. So it's you can nail down when he actually owned it. So his first tenants were the Shirley sisters, the milliners. Then it went to a dentist who didn't actually practice there. He practiced somewhere over the road, I think. But there is one letter from Thomas Hardy to somebody else where he says that it's his dentist and he'd been treated by him. So that was Thomas Hardy's dentist on at least one occasion. And then, quite interestingly, Edgar Lane. And I don't know if anybody's heard of Edgar Lane, because he's become a little bit buried, and there's a reason for that. He was a musician and composer, and he did a lot of work with Thomas Hardy, including putting some of Thomas Hardy's work to score, and songs and so on. But part of the reason why we don't know much about him is a lot of his work got accidentally burnt. So it was lost in two fires, actually, if one isn't bad enough. So we haven't got much of him left. It was then owned, while his next tenant was a Colonel Raglan Wycombe Barnes, who was a medic, and he was working at the military hospital. In fact, he was in charge of the military hospital down in what was the old cavalry barracks. The building is still there. It looks like it's ready to go undergo renovation. But he was in charge of that. And then it went to solicitors, became J.R.R. Judson, tailors, other solicitors, and then finally Jackson, Stop and Staff. I won't go through this. I did most of this. It was Scottish. Scottish family. One can't help but think of Farfrae from Mayor of Casterbridge. I'm sure there are other Scottish people in Dorchester at the time. Yeah, he seriously injured himself in Dorset Hunt steeplechase, and that was at Corton. There's some steep hills at Corton. For people who know that, it's near Friarwadden. Draper. I'm getting a move on now because I'm going to get a bell. So the Thomas Hardy period, he had 4 successive tenants who we've seen. He owned it from 1892 to 1908. The Shirley sisters wrote a letter to Thomas Hardy about their grate. They obviously had problems with their grate. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe the smoke wasn't going up or something. Charles Prideaux wasn't just a dentist. He would become secretary of the Dorset Natural History and Archaeological Society, which is the museum. Think of the museum, that's that. And he'd become a curator of it in his final years. Edgar Lane, we talked about Edgar Lane, who lived there for 2.5 years. We've talked about Barnes, Lieutenant Barnes. And these, we've covered them. Number 52, which is not surprisingly next to 51. This was an interesting one as well, because I opened up the census and I see all these people. And you think, oh, is it a workhouse? What is it? You know, and obviously things drop into place. It was a school. And William Watson was the schoolmaster, followed by Edwin Bowden. And then it became, not the first place, but probably when he really started to expand, the base of George J. Wood, who are the Woods, who we're probably all familiar with, upholsterers, furniture, and all of that. So he started off in a big way at number 52, although he had been, earlier than that, he had been in the corn market working for another upholsterer called Treves. And I don't know if he was related to Frederick Treves or not. He was he? Right. So it then went to a draper, then there was an optician, and then Crickmay and Sons were once there as well. So his school, so it was a boys' boarding school, ages 8 to 14. Successful because it was expanding, 12 pupils, 21 pupils, 25 pupils. You know, and there were 32 people in that house. It's quite a big house, but it was 32 people in there. You know, other times it's like 6. He was born in Plympton, which is near Plymouth, and his wife, Jane, was born in Nottington, and they got married at the church in Upway, which is quite nice because that's where I live, not in the church. Does anybody know what a skimmington ride is?
Yes, yes.
Well, he had one. He had one aimed at him. I will explain what, not everybody will know what a skimmington ride is. Right, okay, so in 1852, this is where the papers come into their own, because I was probably just putting William Watson, Dorchester, into the search engine for the newspaper archive. And I found this. In 1852, he had a maid called Betsy Churchill. He had all the servants as well. Anyway, this servant brings a paternity suit against William Watson. So basically, she's claiming that, you know, she was his lover and she'd become pregnant. And what happened was, what she was charged for, was for abandonment of her child outside the front door. That's all. I don't know exactly any details of that, but she went to prison for a month for this abandonment of her child. And she brought this, her defense was this paternity suit. And news got about the town, and basically a Skimmington ride is where it's basically, it's more of a, I suppose it's a mob with caricatures, a bit like Guy Fawkes riding. It takes different forms. Basically, it's a form of public ridicule of him. And this went on for 3 days until the police stopped it, or 3 nights. So outside number 52, in 1852, every night you could go up there and have a bit of a go at William Watson because he'd made the maid pregnant. Basically, at the end of the day, he was acquitted because it couldn't be proved. So basically, I don't know what happened to Betsy Churchill, but William Watson seems to have carried on successfully with his successful school. His cousin eventually takes over because he retires. His son, Richard, happened to be the first headmaster of Dorset County School. Schools are horribly complicated anywhere because it's not like it is now. Dorset County School was not far from the Sun Inn. It was pretty much in Charminster Parish, or in Charminster Parish. There's nothing to see there now, really. And there are some buildings. There is a building which I suspect may have been the school. But that was the Dorset County School. It should say Dorset County School for Boys. It was only boys. An interest in pubs and beer and so on, of course, so I always tend to latch onto this sort of fact. He had a daughter called Jane, married into the Galpins, who were at the Phoenix Brewery and pub, because they were part of the same business. And that was at 16 High East Street. That is down High East Street on this side, taken over by Groves. The Wood era, do I need to say anything else there? He was actually from Marylebone originally, and she was from Exeter. So the Wood family moved here, and they were in Pease Lane, if you know where Pease Lane is Colleton Street. It was called Pease Lane, and before that it was called Olnan Lane. He owned it, so he was doing quite well. So if you remember the Thomas Hardy era, when we were talking about the Thomas Hardy era, he owned it, and these people were coming in and out as tenants. But George J. Wood had obviously, when he was working for Treves in Cornhill, he'd obviously built up some revenue, some money, either that or he sold a big house in Marylebone, I don't know. So then it becomes owned by other people. So the Woods keep it. So they're now letting it out to this draper from Cannington, which is a lovely place in Somerset. Yes, the reason I put this here, if you look at really old stuff, like I'm going back to the 1400s and 1500s, there was a place on High West Street called the Staining House. And nobody knows where it is. And I'll be frank with you, nor do I. But 51 and 52, maybe 53 as well, seem to have been in some way connected, and there's a well there. Now, it's been suspected that Staining House, nobody's nailed it down, means like place where you dye cloth, that sort of thing, Staining House. And bearing in mind there's a well there, it occurs to me that one of the things you need a lot of when you're doing that sort of business is water. So they had ready access to water. There's a courtyard in there, and it's about the right place. I'll come on to further rationale about that in a moment. Anyway, number 53. Mary Briar independent means that's just what you get on the census. Then it becomes, quite importantly to my mind, the house of Frederick William Smith, a musician. The reason why he's important is more because of his sons, particularly one son, and you may have or may not have heard of Sidney Smith.
Yeah.
Sidney Smith is and still is, if you go looking, obviously he's not like Mahler or Beethoven, he's not that famous, but he is a renowned known composer. And there is evidence just about that he lived at number 53. Frederick William Smith did, and he was his father, so it would seem to make sense. It then went to the Locke family, who were solicitors. And that's interesting because there's more connections to Thomas Hardy here. Like I was saying, I didn't want to make it all about military. I didn't really want to make it all about Thomas Hardy either. But this is what happens when I was saying connections, things go off in different directions. Frederick William Smith and his son, Sidney Smith. He also had another son who took his wife's maiden name, called Boynton Smith. And he was fairly prominent as a musician in the town, including being the organist at St. Peter's for many years. He actually came from Deal in Kent, which is a lovely place if you get the chance to visit it. And she was from Clifton, which is also interesting. So he wasn't at number 53 for long, because by 1863, he'd moved to 16 South Street. Again, the newspapers are very interesting here because it shows a bit more about Frederick's interests and character. I mean, he was a bit more than a musician. He was somebody who sold and rented pianos from his house. He was a traveling music, dancing, and deportment teacher, and he would go to finishing schools for young ladies, teaching them deportment, one of which was at Salisbury Villas, which I assume was down near Salisbury Road and Salisbury Gardens. So he did all this sort of stuff. And of course, he was the father of Sidney Smith. Nailing things is sometimes tricky. I was able to nail things earlier, like Thomas Hardy too, in one instance. I've got as close as I can, because a newspaper advert in 1859, Sidney Smith, this is the composer that is well known, offers music lessons where he states his address to be High West Street, no number specified. But we know his brother is certainly at number 53 in 1857, and his father certainly lives in number 53 in 1861. So bearing in mind he's quite young at this stage, it seems strange that he would be in High West Street and not with his brother and father. By 1861, he had moved to London. He had become famous by now. After he moved to Dorchester, before he moved to Dorchester in 1859, he had been in Prussia and touring the continent, and he was at the Leipzig Conservatory in 1855, impressing the Crown Prince of Prussia. So he was doing well, and that's why he moved to London, because he was getting bigger audiences. So these people, they were, at that time, you were running into, if you were to go to a concert, or if there was something opening, or there was music in some gardens, you would run into Sidney Smith, Frederick Smith, Edgar Lane, who we talked about, whose stuff went up in flames, all these people, and Boynton Smith as well. You would have been running into these people who were basically doing a lot in terms of music. So after the Smiths, we run into the Locke era. This is quite interesting. You've probably read a book or you may well have read a book by Henry Osmond Locke. He wrote the book called just Dorset in 1925, and I'll show you it in a minute. And Arthur Henry Locke, he knew Thomas Hardy because he was his solicitor. until he died suddenly in 1900. The newspapers tell us he was walking past the Antelope Hotel and he just dropped down and he was taken into the Antelope Hotel, but nothing could be done. So he died suddenly then, sadly. One important thing about Henry Osmond Locke is he wrote some memoirs which really help us to understand Hardy's temporary home. Not everybody might know this, but Hardy had a home, I think it was, I can't remember, 1885, 1887, that sort of time, in Glide Path Road for 2 years. And this was while Max Gate was being built. So when you go down Glide Path, so you're going down the hill, you turn left into Glide Path Road. Do you know all know where Glide Path Road is? Just when you get to the Shire Hall. And on the left there are still some entrances there, but they don't go to a house anymore. The house, I think, is where there's parking for the back of the offices in there. But there was a house and gardens in there once. And this was, Thomas Hardy lived there for 2 years. And we know the best description I've seen is in Henry Osmond Locke's memoirs, because he went to a children's party there and described where it was and what he saw. Okay, he's adult, he's grown up, so things might become distorted. But yes, it was there. Yeah, so Henry Osmond Locke knew Hardy well and played a lot of Hardy roles in various performances around the town, or at the Corn Exchange, really. Distracted Preacher, he actually played that, and played John Loveday, a leading role in The Trumpet Major. In fact, in his memoirs, he says that because there has always been a long-running dispute regarding The Trumpet Major, whether the mill was the mill at Sutton Point or whether it was the mill at Upway. And Henry Osmond Locke records that Hardy told him that it was the mill at Upway, but he had transported the building en masse in his head to Sutton Points because he needed a back exit. So he wrote, I'll just show you this book, that book, Dorset by Major Henry Osmond Locke, on many bookshelves, often without its dust jacket. So he wrote that, and he wrote it because it was first offered to Hardy to write. But Hardy wrote to the publisher and said, oh, I know somebody. I can't do it. I know somebody. And he recommended Henry Osmond Locke, so he wrote it. And Henry Osmond Locke successfully bid for Max Gate after Hardy died, because Hardy's sister, after the death of his wife, Florence Hardy, because Hardy's sister, Kate, was worried about what was going to happen to it. So he bid for it. And obviously it ended up in the National Trust's hands. Number 57, we'll rattle through this in the last few minutes. I love that door knocker. So another Lady of Independent Means in 1861, then some various military people, the county jail chief clerk, a furniture and radio shop, Dorset Territorials. It was the address of the Dorset Territorials. And we have letters in the papers from Major Ralph Pope, appealing to people to join the Territorials. Then it became, somebody called Dundas lived there, and then it became various offices, split up. Dorset Community Council, Council for the Protection of Rural England, Marriage Guidance Council, and one of its latest was the Smart Group Recruitment Agency. So 57, now this is interesting because I showed you a book earlier, the Municipal Records of the Borough of Dorchester, Mayo, 1908. I got the year right after all. Now, it's possible to have a go at, I will stress, have a go at, which may not be reliable at reconstructing parts of Dorchester from these documents. And the crux of that is these documents are basically land transfers. And they relate to a particular building, and they say who is next door on both sides. So if you know who is next door, and you find something else, you find that is next door to that, and that is next door to that. You can move the tiles around till everything is in the right order. A caveat is that these things are not issued at the same time in the same year. So you can make mistakes quite easily. But nothing worse, you might as well have a go. You can't see that, and probably quite a good thing. But you could, and this is not to scale. These houses are drawn randomly. It's just a positional reference. But we can locate this one. Obviously, there were fires. I know that they may not be on the same footprint. Things have been rebuilt various times because there were various fires. But this building in the corner, which I've got down as Thomas Crimmelford and then William Crimmelford, and that's in the 1400s. That says, and I think it says it in English, not just in Latin, adjacent to this person and this person, and the road that leads to the North Gate, or vicum qui ad portam borealem ducit. So the same with this one, and you come up eventually to the Stenin house, the thing which might be a dying place, all right? And it's along there somewhere. It's along there somewhere because you do the sequence, all right? And some of these people do remain in place, or families remain in place for a while. And the point I want to make is you can, I've done it for there, basically from 51 down to 57 approximately, and a little bit down what is now Glide Path Road. But you can do it for other parts of the main streets of Dorchester as well. You just have to look and see what's next to what is next to what. It does take quite a bit of time. I've done reports on these houses. Report is probably a bit strong. I've written up the information I have found out about these houses and this, and they're on my blog if people want to look at them. And the blog is at, wait for it, black-slash.co.uk. And by slash, I mean a word, I don't mean that. Okay, it's named after our cat. Because when you open the door, he bolts past like a black slash. So black-slash.co.uk. And you'll find it's just basically a blog with various things on it. So I think I finished on time.
I had a little comment about the Henning brothers. They were both very active in local politics as well.
Yes.
They were on the town council in the 40s, 50s and 60s, and both became aldermen. It's interesting that the older brother, William Lewis Henning, he was a magistrate too. But as you said earlier, he lived at Broom Whitfield, but he always gave the address of the house as Hollis Broom House, which ties in with your link with perhaps.
This is very tricky because one looks at the map now, even old OS maps, England survey maps, and there's never any Hollis Broom. But if you look at Hutchins, the earlier editions, maybe all of them, I haven't looked at all of them. For that, you will find that Hollis Broom is mentioned, and it's mentioned in relation to that St. Nicholas Church.
Yeah.
So, and it is mentioned as though it is a separate house from Whitfield. Whether or not it's actually the same house.
I suspect it is.
It could be the same house because there isn't else, unless it became a ruin with St. Nicholas Church.
Well, he was living in it in the 1850s and 60s, according to Hollis Broom. So I think it's definitely
it's probably.
He's just adopted the name.
Hollis still surviving.
Yeah.
Yes.
The original house in there was replaced by a house much more recently.
Yeah. Probably Victorian. I don't know how old the current house is.
Just an additional comment. The family who live at Through Whitfield now, they did a lot of research and they were poking around in the foundations of their house. And I'm sure I recall them telling me that they had found some evidence of the original Hollis house because they were really excited by that connection.
So are they under the impression that they are built on the site of
I think so,
Hollis
yes.
House? Right, which lends, you know, it supports that maybe it's probably the same.
And there was a big
Big park grounds, and of course, quite wet around there as well.
Yes.
So, you know, whether or not it was that wet during Denzel Hollis's time, we don't know. But sometimes
Yes, certainly
it's
You see, you all endorsed it history. Thank you again.